One day at class, not far from here, the teacher decided that she wanted to have her students tell stories that were moral stories. She asked Sally to come on up and tell her story, so she went up to the class, very quietly told her story. My mommy took us all to Carowinds 2 weekends ago, and my sister and my brother and I all got in the roller coaster with my dad, and it was one of those new fancy roller coasters that goes upside down in a corkscrew. And my mommy stood at the bottom of the roller coaster to watch us, because we said, stand right here, Mom, we're going to be upside down. And so when we came over, she started crying. And we're like, Mommy, why are you crying? She said, I looked up and I saw all my babies upside down, and they were like in a basket, and you were getting shaken out. And I was so scared for you. And Sally said, that's my story. And teacher says, well, Sally, I can guess the moral of that story. Don't put your eggs all in one basket. Sally said, yes, that's the moral of my story. She said, thank you, Sally. Please sit down. Jimmy, would you like to go next? Jimmy stood up and said, well, my granddad invested all his money in AIG, and he was making tons of money. His stock was rolling. He was in the millions. And then all of a sudden in 2008, it went to zero. He lost everything. And now we're in the poorhouse. And Jimmy stomped back to his chair, and teacher said, I'm sorry to hear that, Jimmy. That sounds like don't count your chickens before they hatch. He said, yeah. Then teacher finally got to little Johnny. Now little Johnny was a firecracker. He was a troublemaker in the class, but she put it off as long as possible. Little Johnny walks up to the front of the room, says, let me tell you about my Uncle Frank. My Uncle Frank was no good, worthless bum. He was skinny and scrawny, but he joined the Army anyway. And they put him in as a payload master on a C-130 because he couldn't do anything else except push the button to open the payload doors. And that's what they gave him to do. And so they sent him over to Afghanistan to fly in this huge C-130 high in the air to deliver some jeeps and stuff for the generals over to Afghanistan. And as they're flying, he falls asleep. And he falls asleep in the jeep, sitting in the payload thing. And when they're about to land, he hears landing, and he thought they said crash landing, and he jettisons the jeep with him in it out the back of the airplane. And as they're flying out, he's flying out the back of the airplane in the jeep, he says, oh my goodness, looks over and he has the general's bourbon bottles in the seat next to him in the jeep, and he starts downing the bourbon like crazy. He passes out before he even gets to the ground. The jeep doesn't have a parachute because it's not one of those things that is supposed to shoot out, but it lands on the side of a mountain and slides down the mountain. He wakes up and he's okay, but then he realizes he's landed in the middle of a base camp of insurgents. He gets out of the jeep and he locks and loads, and he starts shooting all the insurgents, and he kills 90 insurgents out of the hundreds sitting there with the jeep's gun on the back of the jeep. But he runs out of ammunition. There's 10 other insurgents standing there, and he grabs a big machete and starts whacking them, and he kills 8 more insurgents with a machete, but there's 2 still coming at him. And he jumps out, and he has his pocket knife, and he stabs them in the chest like this, because he's not very strong, and he never took any training, and he happens to kill them. And he killed 100 insurgents. And then Johnny goes sit down, and teacher says, well, what was the moral to that story, Johnny? Was it, don't jump out of a perfectly good airplane? He said, no, it was don't mess with Uncle Frank when he's been drinking. That's the moral to the story. Thank you very much.